Шановні колеги, ми розпочинаємо.
We're starting the briefing on decentralization. We'll be talking on how to increase incomings to local budgets and ensure successful decentralization reform. We'll be listening to Yuriy Ganushchak, decentralization expert at RPR, Sikora, director of the Open Society Foundation, expert at RPR-Kyiv, and Tatiana Ostrikova, member of parliament from Samopomich faction. Good afternoon. First of all, we would like to welcome you here. We'll be talking about analysis of the impact of decentralization. That is the reform we've been waiting for so long. And the promises on decentralization were the most popular during the last election campaign in October last year. Now we know that the majority in the parliament signed the coalition agreement that stated clear commitments as to executing all the promises in the sphere of decentralization. We would like to inform you today about the promises that were given, what was done during this period of time, and what resources could be taken out of the shadow, how to fill in local budgets, what are the obstacles there, and what do people think about the decentralization reform at the local level. Our Open Society Foundation had the meeting with the activists in 6 cities of Ukraine, of eastern and southern cities of Ukraine. I would like to mention that the decentralization reform opens up huge opportunities, but these opportunities could be lost if, on the one hand, the commitments are not executed, but on the one hand, but on the other hand, if there's no enhanced responsibility of local politicians, and if the citizens do not participate in decision-making process at the local level, and not just taking part in decision-making process, but also having impact at the local level. If we look at the resource that allows us to deshadow the money, according to our assessment, that is 100-200 billion hryvnias. That is the resource that could be channeled to the local budgets in case some preconditions are fulfilled. What are these preconditions? The next slide. First of all, we have the situation now that a week is left to the end of the first quarter of 2015. If we look into the text of coalition agreement, where it talks about fiscal decentralization, we can see that the commitments are to be executed in this period of time, in the first quarter. We have analyzed the execution of these commitments, and we can state that the promise hasn't been executed as to the procedure of paying the personal income tax. We know that the personal income tax is the biggest source of income to the local budget, and the fiscal capacity of local budgets depends on that. This tax is paid at the place of registration of the subject of entrepreneurial activity. The company can work in one place or in one village, but realistically they pay taxes at the place where they are registered, and that's Kyiv or other big cities. That ruins the motivation to fight for getting these taxes locally. And the city mayor depends on the results of economic activities. The next obstacle is, well, basically there was a change of the procedure for paying real estate tax, but that tax is tied up to minimum salary. We understand that the minimum salary is single for the whole of Ukraine, but the cost of real estate is different in Kyiv and in a small settlement. And the tax base is different. So that source of income, this is a significant source of income to the local budget. But once we are talking about switching to European practice of paying real estate tax, we need to take as the basis the cost of the real estate, but not the minimum salary. Another problem is the commitment of the state treasury in part of servicing the payments from local budgets. There were commitments made as to the special fund, but these commitments are executed only in part of revenues and the development fund. The next slide, please. That made us to initiate the Open Society Foundation initiated the open address to the coalition agreement participants, and that was supported by Reanimation package of reforms, and we now send it to the participants of coalition agreement with the requirement to fulfill the commitments made by them in part of fiscal decentralization. Again, it's personal income tax, return to European practice of paying tax for real estate and servicing payments in local budgets via state treasury. And in the end, I would like to mention that we met the groups of initiative groups in 6 cities of the east and south of Ukraine: Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Odessa, Nikolaev, from the 10th till the 19th of March. That was part of the initiative, anti-corruption initiative, that was initiated by Open Society Foundation together with the partners. And it was titled, "Let's Return Billions to Local Budgets." The funds do not get to local budgets because of corruption, because there's no responsibility at the local level, because the executive bodies are not managing efficiently, or they do not want to react to corruption risks. And these are the losses of the local budgets. Talking about Ukraine, that is the resource which is 100-200 billion hryvnias without interbudgetary transfers. Talking about Kyiv, that is 14-28 billion. Talking about the cities like Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, it's from 3 to 6 billion. That's a big resource which could significantly impact the revenue part of the local budgets it is important to execute some conditions at the local level. Besides what we've mentioned about two taxes, it's also enhancing responsibility and requirements to local politicians, to their programs at local elections, the responsibility for commitments made, the participation of citizens in the decision-making process, including the budgetary process. We talk to local activists, but there's a big lack of knowledge and skills, the ability to prepare proposals and to communicate them. And it is important to approve municipal development documentations. If we do not have the general plans or detailed plans of the territories, as the situation in Kyiv shows, and we analyze this situation, we see what are the problems with payments for land. For example, we will have this situation not just in Kyiv but in other cities of Ukraine. If we want to increase the cost of land, if we want to attract investors, to give investors the possibility to execute the investment commitments, then we have to approve the municipal development documentations, and also sectoral reforms are to be implemented so that we can assess how efficiently money is spent for medicine, for education, and so on. And we believe that the punishment for corruption is important. If this is not in place, we will still have the situation when there are some corruption cases registered, but they are not punished, and we cannot talk about return of these billions to local budgets this way. So we have shared our analysis of decentralization, but I believe that talking about administrative, territorial decentralization and fiscal decentralization, this will be described in detail by my colleagues.
Good afternoon, Ganushchak Yuriy. I would like to compliment what has been said about the fiscal decentralization. This is just a component of the reform of the decentralization in Ukraine. And the majority was being done in Ukraine. It was going, the approach was the wrong one from the different point after the separation of function between the state and the self-governance. Then the reform, the fiscal was number 3, but it became the first one. But I believe it accelerates the reform, governance. And speaking about the positive and perspective features which are in store for us for the fiscal reform. First of all, we are talking about the prospects of the regional development. The regional budget has received rather big resources, not just to bridge the gaps, fill the gaps as it was actually existing during the last few years. And we are talking about the introducing transformations in the utilization of the costs. I'm talking what happened last week. There was a long past on the local governance functions, and there are some of the prospects for us to be involved in the system of regional development which exists in the European Union. It was done 5 years ago by Moldova, and they're using the structural funds of the European Union nowadays. They have reserved rather huge funds for us, and they are just waiting until we become more civilized and stop stealing in those huge amounts as we do now. The majority, the overwhelming majority of the cities received rather serious resources. In the level of complaints, drastically decreased, with the exception of Kyiv, which still continues the topic we are being robbed. After introduction and modifications in this tax code and the huge volume of the ungrounded resources which were allocated for Kyiv, testifies to the threat to the security because the administrative and commercial elites in Kyiv have been grown in Kyiv beyond all the natural boundaries. If we do fail to implement the reform in Kyiv, first of all, to separate the functions between the city mayor and the city council separately, if we do not do something about the setting up of the district councils, then Kyiv will become really a big source of threat because corruption temptations skyrocketed of late due to the fiscal decentralization. This also happened because up till now, the Minister of Finance and the government did not take into consideration at all any kind of comments and proposals regarding the local budgets. It was kind of a rupture. In all cases of rupture, this was fraught with some of the mistakes. What I'm talking about, first of all, when we're talking about the level of incomes, and this gap is rather big. For the regional capitals, this difference achieves threefold. For the district, it's twofold, etc. But with time pass, it will level off, and the admin resources will level off some kind of regularities here. The next thing which has to be done, by all means, the social standards. I'm talking about specifically those pertaining to the education and health care. Unfortunately, the Minister of Education is rather lazy. They do not want to do anything about that, but this has to be done. We have to bring some order in the economic classification codes, which could give us the answer whether we have a sufficient number of funds or not allocated. And this answer must be very clear, given by the local government's offices, Minister of Finance, and Minister of Education. Also, we have some kind of discrepancies in financing. I'm talking about the fuel lubricants. Now, this is a kind of a big disproportion here in some village councils. It's again beyond any conceivable boundaries. And this issue also can be resolved only through the reform of administrative territorial management. The real estate tax. Again, this normal standard regarding the square meters is rather strange, and nobody explains why 120 meters and not 100 or 150. But since they have already deduced, we have again bring some order into this kind of approach. We have to fix the standard that this kind, if you're talking about the privileges, this can be applied only to one facility, to one natural person, based on the either physical person address, residential address, or the legal address of the legal entity, whatever. All the rest or the remaining residential area could be treated with some other approach. Speaking about excise on alcoholic beverages and the, let's say, tobacco products, I regard this as a temporary instrument just to bring this kind of market from the shadow area. Because if you're talking about kind of promotion of bad habits, this is really bad, But they did that because the respective ministers are interested that people continue to drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes, whatever. But anyway, as I mentioned, this is really bad. they already mentioned about the treasury in the standard which was adopted just from the voices. We say it was something, but they said that they adopted. And again, given that they are going to implement everything, given the available situation, this kind of humiliation, we are talking about the theory of public finances. This means that the Prime Minister absolutely does not understand what the decentralization means per se. Without any other reform, this reform is going to be absolutely imperfect and non-harmonious. We need a reform, I would mean, Ministry of Management, or separation of the authorities between the state and the local governance, because we do not take care of this aboriginal level problems. We need a very serious administrative reform, because our budgetary cycle is absolutely separated from the procurement cycle, and here we have to resolve the rather serious problems. Maybe we have to unite or combine the Minister of Economy and Minister of Finance. Also, we have to set up in the taxation bodies or agencies in the local governance bodies. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear friends. Jan Ostrikov, People's Deputy of Ukraine, Samopomoch faction, a member of the Committee of Taxation and Policy. Just a few words about the changes introduced. Since December 28th last year, the Verkhovna Rada adopted the law on introducing modifications into the taxation code and making some changes and transformations into the decentralization code, etc. What specifically was changed in the context of this kind of decentralization? This process includes several components. First of all, we are talking about the fact that the local budgets had to give away part of the tax for the physical or natural persons' incomes. And according to Minister of Finance, it's 42 billion hryvnia. This is a guaranteed tax, which was very easy to calculate, which was very easy to provide for in the local budget. If something has been taken away, naturally we have to add something. So what has been added? They added 10% of the profit tax from enterprises. Wonderful standard, and at last the local, let's say the local authorities and mayors will form the local policy just to attract the investors, to create new jobs, and they will start to think how to involve big time and attractive enterprises to their respective regions, and the local government's offices will think to how to make their enterprises profitable. A wonderful idea, but there are some problems along the line of implementation. All of us, we know that an enterprise can be registered, for example, in Kyiv, have some legal address, some kind of small administrative office, but actually the labor collective and all the facilities, production facilities, can be located, for example, in Sumy region. And respectively, the taxes will be paid, profit taxes or income taxes, will be paid based on the location of the enterprise, so of the registration. So the budget of Kyiv will receive that money, but not the specific, let's say, region where this enterprise is located. Again, this is a graphic signal to the authorities regarding the location of different enterprises, to start dialogue with similar enterprises to persuade them resorting to all the possible ways, just for them to be registered according to their actual or factual location. Again, another tax the provision was made for 80% of ecological tax to go to the local budget. In fact, the size of those of the money paid to the local budget was 35%. Again, where they have are the industrial territories or cities where they have industries and ecological, let's say, emissions to the atmosphere and the pollution of the air. The respective ecological tax size will be bigger in those territories where they do not have any industry. So the Minister of Finance informed us that the, let's say, the contributions to the local budget for ecological tax would be 3.2 billion hryvnia this year. Next point, the sale of excise commodities tax. When we adopted this law, we understood that that was kind of a violation of our commitments under the Ukraine-EU association agreement, because this is kind of excise upon excise tax. You know that those commodities which are subject to excise, like the tobacco products or alcoholic beverages or gasoline, already we have a kind of excise tax to the important sales. And when we introduced this kind of retail excise, we introduced a tax upon a tax. But we understood, we realized what we were doing, because according to our association agreement, we have some time to bring our legislation closer to the requirements of EU, and we had to take from the shadow sector all that kind of shadow turnover of the tobacco products and the alcoholic beverages, which we have today. When this retail excise, 100% of that was given to the local, or will be given to the local authorities. The local authorities will be interested, together with their local police and the law enforcement bodies, to exercise control over the payment of those taxes. And of course, we're going to have some kind of let's say, the transition period. And this is not a fiscal function, but regulatory function, what has been mentioned by my colleague. And by doing this, we try to limit the consumption of some harmful products like tobacco products and alcoholic beverages, and to limit the let's say, the money coming from the sale of such luxury things as jewelry or fancy cars, etc. The sales tax, which is most debatable tax today, you were talking about the norms and the standards which have been changed since January 1. Now, this tax was already existing in the tax code, but we introduced another norm bigger than it was before. My colleague said that I can't understand why 60 meters privilege if you're talking about the area or residential area in the apartment. We proceeded that 60 meters is the square or the area of the average apartment, three-room apartment in the 5-story buildings, Khrushchev type as they call it. Here, they adopted, just to make it possible some kind of abuse, actions to abuse of office, I would say, of the local officers. But we are talking about the introduction or establishment of specific norms, standards, or privileges, and it was given 100% for the consideration of local authorities. And the local authorities know their residents and the let's say, the cost of the residential area in their localities. They specifically, only them, can introduce the efficient, let's say, rate, no tax rate. We adopted that understanding that we are going to have the election campaign in the last fall, and of course we understood that the local authorities will try to play kind of the flirt, if you will, with the local residents, just to make them vote for them. But we understand that the size of this tax cannot exceed 2% of the minimum salary in Ukraine. We're talking about 1,008 hryvnia, so we are talking about 24 something hryvnia for square meter. I would like also to say that today we have analyzed what kind of rates have been introduced here and nobody, almost nobody from the local authorities introduced the maximum rates. For example, in Lviv, Rivne, and Zaporizhia, the local authorities, let's say, they introduced 0.5% from the minimum salary, perhaps knowing that the let's say the incomes of the local population are not real big. Speaking about European practice in this specific issue, they hint that I have to finish or crown my speech, but I have a lot of what to say. Now, just a few words about the real estate tax. My colleagues already mentioned, and I appreciate the controlled exercise over the implementation of those, let's say, changes in transformations. Here we are going to use this kind of tax in compliance with the best European practices. But they fixed a very good phrase, the best European or the global practice, and nobody in those days analyzed what is the gist of those practices, and which depends upon the cadastre or the assessment cost of the real estate. For example, in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, in Poland, our closest neighbors of the former Soviet camp, they introduced those taxes in euros. If anybody is interested, I can tell you later. But this is even lower than we have in Ukraine. We are talking about the figures. In Poland, for example, the tax rates are differentiated, and the lowest 0.17 euro per square meter. Well, it's about 3.74 hryvnia. That's why we did not introduce, let's say, depending on the assessment cost or value. But we understand this kind of value has not been established in Ukraine. We didn't want to, let's say, to put everyone in the corner, to take care of the assessment, evaluation, and go to some office, whatever else, and to just to get this kind of the cost of the value of the house or the apartment. During this year, we would like to take care of the assessment, evaluation of all the real estate, and to fill the estate register with the information about the assessment or evaluation information, and only after that, maybe starting with the year 2016, maybe later, we can introduce this kind of tax independent on the valuation value. Thank you.
I believe that we probably will have a special briefing for that topic, because that's important. It's unlike many things about decentralization, is very important for the majority of people. Man-informed agency. There's such a tax. It's a question and proposal. There's a tax for lease of housing. Many people in Kyiv are leasing out their apartments. Usually the tax is paid for offices, but not for residential apartments. There was an old initiative of the old mayor to pay tax for housing. Did you calculate in your 1428 billion for Kyiv? Did you include that into your calculations when you were talking about 1428 billion? And so basically, once we're talking that the physical person leases out the apartment, such person has to pay 15 or 17% of the physical person income tax. If we are talking about the entrepreneur, in this case, the entrepreneur can select the simplified system of taxation. If this housing is owned by the legal entity, they pay the corporate income tax. There's no tax as a tax for leasing out of housing. This is the tax which is not in any country of the world. this is the income tax, basically, and they charge either from legal entity or from physical person. It can be administered only on condition if a person who hires the housing receives some compensation via social funds. Only in this case, this could be a normal accounting. But in this case, those who lease out the apartments, who let the apartments, they will be interested in doing it officially. We're all talking about residential fund, but non-residential fund like trading centers, the commercial cost of such housing is from 500 to 900 hryvnias per square meter for rent. That's a month, and let's calculate it. If we charge 2 hryvnias as maximum rate that they will be paying with the existing tax code. Again, we can compare the cost of the similar real estate in Zhytomyr or in Nizhyn, and you will understand what's the demand and what's the proposal, and that's a big source of income. Usually the land, we are analyzing the budget of Kyiv, but we do not get the information about how much the owners of commercial real estate paid for the land where their facilities are located. That's another big source of income. Talking about big cities, it's important to pay attention to this sector of not just residential real estate, but non-residential real estate, because that will affect the rates and the development of business. I have one question. I do not know which one of you can answer. You enumerated the problems, which are the obstacles to the reform. Most of them, as I understand, are of bureaucratic nature. That's not related to any other difficulties. These are bureaucratic things which could have been calculated in advance. Why this hasn't been done? Who should be responsible for that? For like administering taxes, who has to be responsible for that? In fact, if we take the situation in Kyiv, we know this situation very well. There are no detailed plans of the territories. The land plots continue to be distributed just like in the past. Pennies are paid for the land. In the center, there are some places where people pay 33 kopecks per square meter a month. But I mean the personal income tax. According to statistical data, if we look at the personal income tax, the producers of sunflower or other agricultural products, they pay mostly the personal income tax. But this is the money of the companies which are registered in Kyiv, but they operate on other territories, but the personal income tax is paid in Kyiv. Okay, thank you. In a few minutes we will have another briefing. Thank you.
У нас минулого тижня були сказали, що неспівставні цифри, що ми забрали
Це плакальщики. Насправді рівень субвенції ПДФО забрали 42 мільярда, рівень субвенції 42